Hi, my name is Alyssa Timoshkina. I am a chef, food writer and historian, and I'm really thrilled to show you two recipes inspired by the films in the Feast from the East program. So the first one that I'm going to make is quintessential Eastern European in its flavors, and it's super simple. You only need 4 ingredients. Of course, bread, chleb, is a sacred ingredient in Ukraine and also in Eastern Europe, and specifically delightful rye sourdough bread. And the taste of summer really to me is cucumbers and dill. That is something that I immediately think of when you say summer in Eastern Europe to me. And really this is my favorite snack at home. It's simply you'd have a cucumber, a whole bunch of dill and a slice of rye bread sprinkled very generously with unrefined sunflower oil, and that's what you can just snack on. So I thought to turn it into a little salad instead, because just to give it a bit more kind of elegant presentation and something a bit more exciting in terms of texture as well. So we're going to make lovely croutons from the rye bread, and then quick kind of pickle the cucumbers and red onion, and then mix it all together. Adorn it in dill and some coriander and fennel seeds. So I'm going to start by making the croutons first. And I wish you could be here to feel how fresh and crunchy this bread is. It's still warm, so it's almost a shame to not eat it fresh, but for the purpose of the recipe. Sort of doing, you can actually also, this bread is so fresh that it's almost hard to cut. You can also tear it, and you know, the kind of equivalent, it's almost like an Eastern European panzanella salad. So you have chunks of bread that's either fried in a bit of oil in a pan, or as we're gonna do, cooked in the oven. And then it adds just such a wonderful crunch to the salad. And also the best part for me is also quite a traditional Ukrainian and Eastern European thing to do is when you have the dressing from the salad, you've eaten the salad and you have that beautiful pool of the juices of the vegetables, the oil and the salt, and then you take a big chunk of bread and you dip it in and you kind of mop it all up. And that's also the reference to that wonderful culinary experience in this salad. And it's quite delightful how the bread soaks up all the juice from the quick pickle with the cucumber that we're going to make. And I chose to make this recipe to echo the beautiful film Chleb that is featured in the program. And as we know, you know, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, and the history of bread is beautiful but quite traumatic as well. And this is something that the film reflects. It was made just before the start of the Great Famine, Holodomor, and it really is a moving experience to see it from today's perspective, especially when once again we're faced with extremely traumatic historical circumstances where bread, where Ukrainian grain is used as a political tool, and we're currently facing a very unpredictable climate in terms of our access to grain, and also sunflower oil, which is quite worrying and makes us appreciate what we have on our plates even more so, and makes us appreciate those films from today's perspective even more so. So this is really homage, a celebration of Ukrainian bread culture and specifically of the beautiful tradition of sourdough rye bread making. So to make a dressing for this lovely croutons, we're gonna add quite a big amount of sunflower oil. Also a note on sunflower oil. Here in the UK, we think of the colorless, flavorless stuff that you get in plastic bottles in supermarkets. That's usually used for deep frying or roasting. But what I mean is something entirely different. It's unrefined, cold-pressed sunflower oil, which, as we know, Ukraine is such an iconic space of fields of sunflowers. So the sunflower oil that you get in Ukraine is literally liquid gold. It's so rich in color and its flavor. Imagine eating a whole teaspoon of freshly toasted sunflower seeds. That's what you get. It's almost like extra virgin olive oil in Italy, so you would use it for dressing your salads and for really introducing extra flavor to the dish rather than just using it as an agent that enables you to fry stuff. So I've got quite a big amount in here, and I'm gonna add a very generous amount of salt, and I'm using Maldon sea salt. And then I'm just gonna put my croutons in and give them a stir with my hands until they're nicely coated and equally coated. And then I'm gonna put it on a roasting tray, spread them out evenly. Get all of the salty bits out. And that's it. And then we're going to send it into the oven that I have preheated at 160 fan for about 20 minutes. So we don't want it to be too crunchy and too dry. We still want it to retain a little bit of a bite to it. And while I'm doing that, then I'm gonna make the rest of the salad. So I can just reuse the same bowl. And again, we're gonna make the dressing and dressing / marinade. Again, I'm adding quite a liberal amount of oil. Then I'm going to use some honey. I've got this really lovely local honey. So I'm based in North London, and I've got this lovely honey that's made by the bees from Hampstead Heath. And of course, honey is another huge traditional ingredient in Ukraine, and you have a whole variety of regional honeys, which obviously taste very different depending on where you are. So I've added a teaspoon of that. Then I'm going to add a big pinch of salt and also a tablespoon of, I've got a lovely raw live apple cider vinegar. You can, if you don't have it, that's fine. You can use white wine vinegar, but apple cider has a much more fruity and a lot more mild flavor, so it works really well for kind of a gentle summery pickle. I'm just gonna give it a mix for the honey to dissolve. And when I cook, I really trust my senses and also my mood. So when I write recipes or when I teach cooking classes, I always encourage people to trust their own senses. Apparently our taste buds are as unique as our fingerprints. So for some people, the amount of salt that I'm suggesting might be too much or not enough. So I hope this is kind of a springboard and an inspiration for you to then go off and create your own version of this salad. So this would be kind of my standard proportions for making a dressing, but if you feel like you'd like to change it a little bit, then please do. So I'm going to set the dressing aside, and then I'm going to prepare the onion. Kind of following on to the same subject, some people love raw onion and garlic. I'm not one of those people. So you can add a lot more than I will, or you can chop it more into more thick wedges. I'm going to do very thin ones, and I'm also going to marinate it a little bit so it's not as kind of feisty as a raw onion. I'm using a mandolin. It's very useful but a very dangerous kitchen device. So if you are using one, please be very mindful of your fingers. Okay, that's enough for my liking. Just going to give it a stir. And then I'm gonna cut the cucumber. And I think a whole love letter needs to be written to Ukrainian cucumbers. Usually they would be much smaller and quite prickly. So you can find them in the UK. Especially if you go to kind of what we refer to as Turkish grocery stores, and they're often called Kirby cucumbers. But if you don't have that, that's fine. You can just use a standard English cucumber. Now we're in the summer, so they are in season and usually taste quite lovely and fragrant and flavorful. So as you see, this is a super simple salad where we really are relying on the ingredients, on their freshness and their character to really give the salad all the flavors that it needs. So I'm using kind of roughly half of the cucumber, and I'm going to cut it into dices. You can go as small, fine as you want. If you have outstanding knife skills, then go ahead. If not, you can just cut it into whichever size you prefer. I really appreciate how now, at least here in London, but I think kind of globally speaking as well, there's a real trend or a real movement towards quality of the ingredient and simplifying its presentation as much as possible. So if you ever get a chance to enjoy an authentic Eastern European cucumber, I would literally, imagine myself if I were to run a restaurant, I would literally serve a whole cucumber, a slice of bread, and like the best quality unrefined sunflower oil, and let the customer kind of bite into it and use their hands to enjoy it, because it really is the most beautiful sensory experience. Eating with your hands in the summer, I literally can't think of anything better than that. Now I'm going to give this a big mix. You can also use shallots if you don't have red onion. I quite like kind of how almost monochrome the dish is, but then if you add the red onion, it kind of just adds a little bit of burst of color, which is quite delightful to look at, as well as, and obviously gives it a much needed kind of extra kind of spicy bite to it. Oh, this just tastes like home. So I'm going to leave this to marinate. You can actually, if it's really hot, you can put it in the fridge, which I'm going to do now. And then we're going to finish our salad with a little addition of another element that I love in my cooking, and which is again iconic of Eastern European flavors, is the seeds, which would be coriander and fennel. There's also caraway, which is another very distinctive flavor of Eastern European cuisine. Personally, I'm not a huge fan, so I'm not using it here, but if you love it, then by all means go ahead and use it as well. You can, if they're nice and fresh, you can use them untoasted. I always prefer toasting my seeds first. It just really kind of opens up their flavor and gives it a bit more depth. It kind of gives it a more kind of nutty, you know, it's almost like in music, like a bass note, and that becomes the bass note of your flavor profile of what you're making. So again, kind of without any very specific measurements, we're adding, roughly speaking, a tablespoon of each, and then I'm gonna grind it in my pestle and mortar. And again, wish you were here to enjoy the scents that are gradually opening up. I mean, cooking is just the most incredible sensual experience. I think to me, cooking and watching Parajanov's films is kind of on the same par of how your senses are awakened and involved kind of wholeheartedly in the process. But I'll talk about Parajanov when I make my next salad. So you can leave it quite coarse, or actually if you have a coffee grinder or a special spice grinder, you could blend them there. I would recommend not going too far with it so it doesn't turn into dust, because we still want to have a bite to it. But it's quite nice to have kind of a mix of fine and coarse grind of the spices. Okay, and finally I'm going to chop the dill. I could literally do a whole hour-long class about dill. This really is the kind of the blood of Eastern European cooking. That flavor, the scent is so essential. I know that at least here in the UK, dill is often associated with Nordic cuisine, which it also is a big part of. But for some reason, it's only designated to fish dishes, which it works beautifully with. But I always feel really kind of annoyed that, like, come on guys, you can open up the doors and, you know, let the dill in a bit more. So it works beautifully with fish. But if you ask me, I would literally use dill everywhere apart from dessert. I'm yet to come up with a dessert that uses dill, because I'm sure there's a way to do it. I've done it with coriander, so I think dill will be my next experiment. So this bunch, which is kind of the standard amount of dill that you get from a UK supermarket, to an Eastern European cook will be laughable. You'd probably need at least 5 of them to kind of make it feel like this is the right amount of dill. But we're gonna, you know, kind of embrace the culture of the place where we are now, and I'm gonna use the whole bunch to go into the salad. And I'm gonna cut the, as I said, the whole bunch, the stalks included. They're a bit more flavorful and kind of stronger to bite into. If you are still kind of on an intermediate dill level, then perhaps you want to not include that and kind of introduce yourself to dill a bit more gradually. So I think by this point our croutons should be ready, and I'm going to get them out and then assemble the salad. So we've got our croutons nice and crispy. I'm going to let them cool down a little bit, and I'm going to get the cucumbers out. The wonderful thing about salt, of course, is that it draws out the juice of the vegetable that you've salted. So by this point, we have a little bit more liquid than we started with, and that's the lovely fresh juice of the cucumber, which will work so wonderfully to get absorbed into the croutons. And then I'm going to use most of the dill and leave a little bit for dressing the plate at the end. So for some people that might seem like an insane amount of dill, but for most Eastern European people that will be just the right amount. And then I'm going to use just a pinch for now, and then again I'm going to use more to dress. And again, when you're making this at home, feel free to taste it as you go along, and then you can adjust if you'd like some more toasted seeds or more dill. You've definitely become my best friend. And I'm just going to give it a little extra drizzle of the oil. Okay. And I'm going to get a nice plate to serve it on. You can go very rustic and just serve it in a bowl like that. You know, if you're in a country house somewhere in Eastern Europe, that would be probably the most natural way of serving this. But I'm just going to make it a little bit more, I guess, London-ish, and present it on a plate. If you were serving it at a dinner party as an individual starter or a little sharing plate. And then we're going to use a bit more of the seeds, a bit more dill. You can also just add a little sprinkle of salt and just a little drizzle of oil. And there you have it. A really wonderful salad that celebrates the simplicity and the beauty of Eastern European cuisine in the summer. It features rye croutons as an homage to Ukrainian bread culture, fresh cucumber, dill, and lovely unrefined sunflower oil. So the second recipe that I'm going to cook for you today is another classic from Eastern European cuisine. And this one is very seasonal, so it's essentially a cabbage slaw which you can adapt to different seasons. The one I'm making now is more of a summer one, but there are so many different vegetables you can add to it and enjoy it all year around. This salad includes some of the classic Eastern European flavors. I mean, cabbage, that's a mother ingredient in so many ways, and I absolutely love celebrating cabbage in my cooking. Cabbage has a really bad rep here in the UK, and it's often associated, perhaps because of the Cold War mentality, with the bad Eastern European cuisine, that smell of overcooked cabbage. You know, Orwell opens his brilliant novel 1984 with a description of a hallway that smelled of overboiled cabbage, and that kind of represents, you know, the totalitarian regime itself. But of course, cabbage is fantastic. It has a whole myriad of really fantastic nutritional elements in it, but also it tastes great and it's so versatile. And I think Eastern European cuisine wouldn't be what it is without the humble cabbage. So this is the key ingredient in this salad. And also apples. I am taking my inspiration here from the iconic scene in Davzhenko's Earth, where we have the most beautiful kind of contemplation on life and death, all set in one mise-en-scène. And the imagery of apple is, of course, you know, it's almost biblical, and the apple has so many wonderful and fascinating connotations in the film. In my recipe, it's there, of course, to give us flavor, but maybe also make you kind of muse about, you know, the meaning of life and the beauty of Davzhenko's art as well. We also have red pepper and some carrots. Dill, of course, if you haven't seen the previous video, do watch it where I sing praise to dill. And finally, as a little nod to my favorite director, Sergei Parajanov, we have pomegranates. So what we're going to do is we're going to chop the cabbage. I'm going to use the mandolin again because it gives a really nice and even kind of size. But if you don't have a mandolin, it's absolutely fine. You can use a knife. This is a really wonderful and messy affair, as you can see, and it's fun to do it with kids. So I've finally cut some cabbage, and I'm gonna add just a pinch of salt now and give it a little massage and leave it in the bowl while I prepare everything else. And again, here salt plays a wonderful magical role of extracting the juice. And this is a very young, fresh cabbage, so I feel that we're going to get a really lovely juice coming out of it soon. I've got big pockets, and then cabbage is flying into them as well. Okay, so I'm going to leave that while I prepare the rest. I'm going to use 2 apples and 2 carrots. Again, if you don't have a mandolin, you can just chop the apple as fine as you can. And then careful with your fingers when you reach a thinner slice, it's safer to cut it by knife. Okay, gonna add it to the bowl with the cabbage. And we have a red pepper. This is a really wonderful salad that you can have as a side dish to your barbecue, for example. It's a really perfect sort of cooking outside salad. And if you're making some kebabs or whatever else you'd like to cook on your barbecue, then making a big bowl of this would really be all you need to serve as a side dish. And it has so many different fruits and vegetables in it. It just bursting with flavor and is really ticking all the 5-a-day boxes as well. Sorry, I'm going to be safe with my mandolin because the last thing we want is to have an accident while I'm doing this. So I'm not being particularly waste-free here, but I'm going to just eat it myself later. But the great thing about this salad is that it really does support the kind of no waste ethos. And you can literally cut pretty much anything into here. And it's all about the lovely dressing and the kind of key ingredients of the cabbage that holds the dish together. And finally, I'm going to peel and grate some carrot. So we've got all of our main ingredients here in the bowl, and I'm going to give them a quick mix. You still want to have the cabbage as kind of the key, slightly dominating vegetable. But as you can see, visually, it's also quite a lovely dish that it has a nice combination of reds and oranges from the carrots and the apples and the pepper. So we've mixed our salad and we're going to let it rest a little bit more, and now we're going to make the dressing. This is another very simple and very similar dressing to what we've made for our previous salad. So again, you will need this fantastic unrefined sunflower oil. And maybe I'll try to be a bit more precise this time. We can use 4-5 tablespoons. And then we're going to use a tablespoon of, that's a bit more. I'm going to juice half a lemon. I've got this wonderful device, which is also great for getting the pomegranate seeds out of the pomegranate. Salt. As I've already put a pinch of salt in here, I'm just using 1 pinch for the dressing. A bit of honey. It's a bit of a foolproof recipe, really, where you have a really lovely balance of sweet, sharp, and salty. And as I've said before, the apple cider vinegar really adds a bit of fruitiness to it, so it fits really well for the kind of alfresco summer dining experience. So I'm gonna mix it up together. And then I'm going to pour it over the salad. Again, you can use your hands or a spoon if you like, or both. Give it a good mix. And then we're going to send it to rest in the fridge. So if you're making this and you have the time, I would recommend that you give it maybe 1 or 2 hours in the fridge, because it really does absorb and kind of mix all the flavors really well together. And once it's done, the salad also stays really well in the fridge for next day. So if you want to make a big batch that lasts over 2 days or even 3 days, that's absolutely fine. So our salad is nice and cool out of the fridge, and I am going, at this point, I'm going to add some pomegranate. So I have quite a big cup here, so I'm adding half of it. Gonna give it a mix. We also have some pre-cut dill that I didn't use in the previous salad. We have a bit of that, and then I'm gonna cut more, of course. But this time I'm gonna leave maybe that much, so quite a small bunch for decor, and chop the rest. I also have some sunflower seeds here. I'm going to add most of it, and again leave a little bit for decorating at the end. Going to give it another good mix. And then I have this lovely Parajanov-esque bowl, which I feel he would approve of, that I'm going to serve this salad on. And you can pile it up as high as you like. Whenever I make this salad, I often think of Georgian and Armenian stalls at the former Soviet food markets, where you would have these beautiful massive mountains of pickles and ferments and fresh herbs. So this is kind of, marrying both the Ukrainian but also Georgian and Armenian heritage that we're celebrating with the film program here. And then to finish, we're gonna sprinkle more pomegranates. It's like jewels. More sunflower seeds. And then I'm gonna take the dill and I'm gonna literally just tear it with my hands into kind of bite-size chunks. And then I'm just gonna put it on top like that, and then here you can judge how much is too much. As I've said before, when it comes to dill, there is no such thing as too much dill, but I think I'm gonna stop here not to scare anyone off with the crazy amounts of dill that I'm using. So here is my summer slaw with pomegranate, sunflower seeds, apples, carrots, red peppers. The core ingredient is cabbage, and we've generously dressed it with some dill. And the salad is celebrating both the Ukrainian and the Caucasian origins of the program, particularly homage to Dovzhenko's beautiful scene of apples, and of course Parajanov's color of the pomegranates.